Hi everyone, it's Gary here from Echidna Sewing, and today I am going to dig right in very deep to the things that you can do to keep your machine well maintained and ensure that you get trouble-free stitching pretty much every time you go to it. Obviously, there's all sorts of different brands and makes and models out there and types of machines. So the information I'm going to give you is fairly generic, but I'll obviously be working on a brother machine. This is actually a second-hand dream machine that's probably about 6 years old, has done about 16 or 17 million stitches. So it's had good use, got lots of good use ahead of it as well. But if you keep it well maintained and know what to look out for, what to listen for, you'll avoid many of the problems that can be associated with just normal everyday sewing and embroidery. I'm also going to be going through quite a few of the standard tools that I kind of like to have near the machine and things that I would recommend anyone to have in terms of keeping it cleaned and maintained. I'll also be reading through a list of various things that you can do, and this is on our website, so it's a full list of just maintaining your machine and making sure that you keep it in good order. So I'm going to use that as a bit of a reference as we go through here. It's not a short video, it's quite in depth, so have some patience, but I think if you sit through and listen to everything we've got to talk about, you'll absolutely, without doubt, come away going, wow, I think I can keep my machine running a bit better or conquer some of those little problems that you suffer from time to time. Because as a mechanic myself, I can tell you that the vast majority of problems that machines or people experience with their sewing or embroidery machines, it's very rarely the machine that has failed. It's normally something that you control, a setting, or you haven't maintained it, or the quality of the thread or the stabilizer, all sorts of reasons that can cause a machine to give you an improper result. So let's start. I'm going to start initially by talking about the machine that I'm actually going to be working on. So this, as I said, is a Brother Dream machine, beautiful machine, and it is secondhand. It's got 16 or 17 million stitches on it. Sounds a lot, but it's not really. It's probably it'll do another 30 or 40 million stitches as long as it's maintained and looked after. It'll do that quite comfortably. I have got it without the embroidery unit on, so it's just in the standard sewing configuration. And the first thing we're going to do is go through the where you have your machine sitting, basically the sewing room or the sewing environment, because there's certain things about your sewing environment that can cause issues. And again, this is all on these notes that are on our website and under our articles pages. And one of the things that's often overlooked is the quality of the work table or the surface you're working on. Any engineer will tell you the enemy of anything mechanical is vibration. So you do need to always make sure you've got a pretty solid work surface or a surface that's not going to vibrate. Time and time again, we have people will call us and say, hey, my machine's doing this or that. And often the problem can be that the table that it's working on is so insecure and so unstable that the machine is bouncing around while it's sewing. And that's particularly bad for embroidery because that actually promotes the hoop bouncing, and that will give you flagging and thread shredding and so on and all sorts of horrible problems. So always make sure your table is solid and it's not bowing in the center. If your table is bowing in the center and you've got a big embroidery unit on your machine, that actually puts a lot of stress on the whole mechanism. The embroidery unit's not going to sit perfectly flat and that can cause some problems. A solid table that doesn't vibrate is super important. In your sewing environment, and depending on where you live, you'll have certain climatic conditions that you can or can't control. Example, someone who lives in Western Queensland and is dry, dusty area will find that the humidity is very light, very low, it's dusty. That sort of environment will promote a drying out effect on machines. And one of the things that's important is all sewing machines need oil and lubrication at some point. These days, most machines don't require you to oil it. So for example, on this machine, there's nowhere really that you can oil this machine. The book will tell you to not oil it anywhere. If you have a machine that in the user's manual it says, oil here, oil there, then you should do that. You should follow the book's manuals. But most modern machines sort of avoid asking you to oil them. But that's what we do when we service machines. We strip the machines down and we clean them out, get all dust and dry lubricants out and replace all that. But if you're in a very dry environment, you might find that service is required more often. If you're in a humid environment, it kind of goes the other way. You do get a lot of humidity build up on machines, and that promotes a bit of surface rust on parts, etc. So again, routine servicing is what helps prevent that climate controlled evaporation or clogging of lubricants and so on that are in the machine. So, I can't stress that enough, routine servicing. Most machine manufacturers will recommend a yearly service interval. And here's a tip. I would rather a machine be overused than underused. So if you've had your machine sitting in a cupboard for the last 6 months and you dig it out and expect it to run beautifully, there's a chance that it will be a bit dry and it may not run as well as you'd like it to. So try and keep your machine used regularly. Another big tip on use, if you have a combination sewing and embroidery machine, and you use it primarily for embroidery, which a lot of people do, it's a great idea to convert it back to sewing mode once a month and just run it for 5 minutes in sewing mode. Use a zigzag, use a bit of forward-backward stitching. That just keeps the whole feed mechanism moving and fluid and keeps the lubricants moving, and it will ensure that it will work as a sewing machine when you go to use it. Often you'll see an embroidery combination machine come in where it hasn't been sewn on as normal sewing for 2 years, and the whole feeding mechanism and everything's a bit dry and it just doesn't work as well as you'd like it to. So that's a really good tip. As far as your environment in the room goes, a good idea is not to leave your machine sitting under an open window under direct sunlight, because direct sunlight, all it will do is help destroy the plastics, the covers that the machine has all around it, and that's unsightly. I have seen machines where the touch screen, the color touch screen, has been in direct sunlight every day for several months, and that will, the UV light will actually destroy the screens if you sort of leave it there. So be sure to not do that. Cover the machine if it is affected by some sunlight. The other big one from a general sewing area is, unfortunately, insects, and you have to control that because we live in Queensland, so we understand the issues of cockroaches and other flying little bugs that get in everywhere. They do like to get inside the warm, dark areas of sewing machines. The boards and the circuitry on sewing machines are a real haven for particularly cockroaches. And once they get onto boards and infest a machine, they will destroy a circuit board without any question at all. So, and of course, that's not a warranty issue. If there's insect infestation on a circuit board, that can't be covered under warranty. So keep insects away, keep baits around, do whatever you have to do to prevent that from happening, because that's a real killer on sewing machines. And not only that, it just is horrible to deal with if you have to deal with it. And while we're talking insects, there's another little guy that's really bad. Again, we live with and breathe with it in Queensland, and that's geckos. Those little guys get in everywhere, and they're horrible things, and they short circuit boards and all sorts of things. The air conditioning industry, for instance, it's a big problem in electronics in air conditioners is geckos. They usually go where insects live. So if you get rid of the insects, you often get rid of the geckos. So as I said, all this is on the article that we have on our website, but those little things will definitely help you. Let's get into what you can do on a regular basis to maintain the machine now. And we'll just move that out the way for a minute. Cleaning in around your sewing area is probably the most important thing to do. And it's not difficult. Most machines will recommend that, of course, in their user manual. I would have recommended on every machine. And on this machine, this is very typical of a modern high-end sewing and embroidery machine. We've obviously got a drop-in bobbin. We've got our presser foot here. We've got needle threading and all sorts of things there. But the main area that you need to concern yourself is in around the bobbin area. Now, there's a few tools that I would recommend, and one of the things I do recommend a decent paintbrush. Now, this is let me just take this out. This is just a little $3 or $4 paintbrush I bought from a local hardware store. It's a nice quality one. It's got nice long bristles, and I like that rather than the typical sort of nylon short bristle brush that you often see supplied with sewing machines or are sold as sewing machine service or cleaning brushes. I much prefer this type of thing. So we're going to use that. A good pair of tweezers is always handy. A little tiny tension screwdriver. I'm not going to be adjusting tensions on this video because I've already done another great video that explains all that, but having a little tension screwdriver, which incidentally almost always comes standard with a sewing machine. A great little multi-purpose screwdriver. I'm going to be using this one. I love this guy. It's a little multi-purpose screwdriver that has 3 positions for the blade, and you'll see why that's really good soon. And of course, a cleaning cloth and a microfiber cloth, so we'll talk about that. So let's dig into cleaning out the embroidery, the sewing area. So the first thing I'm going to do, I have the machine switched on. Now, I'll guarantee that every service manual or user guide that you have will probably say switch the machine off while you're doing this, and that's not a bad idea. I would encourage you to do it. I'm going to leave it on because I want to have the lights on and everything. So, but you should follow what the user manual says, and it says to switch it off in almost every instance. The first thing I'm going to do though, and before you switch the machine off, is make sure that you remove the presser foot. So I'm just going to drop the foot off here so it's not in the way. Again, this is a sewing and embroidery model, so you'll see that there's actually a set of feed teeth just here. If you have an embroidery only machine, there won't be feed teeth. It'll just be a flat plate. This machine has a separate needle plate as opposed to the bobbin cover plate. And what I'm also going to do too, by the way, is just remove the free arm cover there, or the extension table. That makes it easier to get to. Again, this is a second-hand machine, so or a used machine, so you'll see it's got a little bit of normal wear and tear. And that's an interesting point too. This needs a bit of a clean and a service, obviously. We've just traded it, and it'll come up beautiful, but just make sure you keep your machine clean. A bit of very mild, warm, soapy water is a good way to clean it. Don't go too aggressive with you know, caustic sort of cleaners, because they can really irritate and destroy the plastic. So you know, test it with just a mild soapy water solution is usually a good idea. Some of the mild sort of spray and wipe type things are okay, but don't go squirting everywhere. Just be very careful with it. Keep your plastics nice and clean. One thing you will never avoid on a sewing or embroidery machine is the little scratches and things that will happen on the plastics. So I know we all want to keep them pristine, but I often see machines come in that are totally pristine as if they've never been used, and that is because they probably haven't been used very much. So you buy them to use them, give them a good workout. You will mark them. It's just normal. Don't panic too much. It's not going to destroy the machine, and it's just a sign that you have actually been using them. Right, so this guy, I'm going to remove the bobbin. So on this machine, it's just a matter of popping that little plate out. I'm going to take the bobbin out. And I'm not sitting in front of the machine, so I'll try and keep my hands out of the way as best I can. On this machine, that little grey plate actually slides forward. Now, again, on this model, once I slide that forward, it disables the machine, so the machine won't let me do anything, even if I was to touch some buttons. That plate, though, they last a long time. Rarely do we ever need to replace those. At the moment, bobbin case is in position, and I'm going to take that bobbin case out. Now, a little tip on most Brother sort of high-end embroidery machines, and I can't speak for all other brands, but I can speak for Brother very clearly. They come with two bobbin cases. This is actually the sewing bobbin case, and I know it's the sewing bobbin case because it has a green sort of paint type of thing over the adjusting screw, and there's no little dot in the middle. So let's have a look at the difference. This is the embroidery bobbin case. The embroidery bobbin case has a little, sometimes it's a red or purple or blue dot in the middle of the bobbin case, and it has no paint or green, let's just get that together, no little sort of sealant over the screw, if you like, or a Loctite type thing. And that's because in embroidery, adjusting the bobbin tension is quite important, and you do need to do that from time to time. I have a completely separate video on that very process, so you can watch that if you wish, and it's pretty informative. So, two different bobbin cases. I'll come back to them before I put them back in. Right now, the needle plate is still in situation there, and I don't always need to take that off. But if I do, it's good to have a convenient screwdriver to do it with, and this is great, these little adjustable multi-position screwdrivers, because I can turn the blade around to that angle there, and that allows me to very easily just get into the screw and whoops, drop it, as I have done here, and just adjust that screw. Now, a little tip before we go on, if I'm taking the needle plate off, and you want to be super careful, leave the grey plate on and leave that little cover on as well. That way, as you undo these screws, you really can't drop them down into the machine. So if you do that, you won't drop the screws down into that. That's not the end of the world if you do drop a screw into the machine. It's just that you'll probably have to bring the machine to a mechanic to get it out, and that can be an inconvenience. So once you've undone those two screws, just take them off, take them away there. I can, of course, just pull that grey plate forward again, and lift the needle plate straight off. And there we have it. So we've now exposed the whole stitching mechanism of the machine. Now, a lot of people at this stage will grab a can of that spray air. So you can buy a little aerosol can that is basically just compressed air, and then they'll squirt around and blow all the fluff and the lint out, or so you would think. And while that does certainly blow a lot of fluff and lint out, it blows a lot of fluff and lint back into the machine. So I personally do not recommend using the cans of spray air on a home style machine. If you own a PR series machine, like the industrial type machines, it's no big deal because you don't have that mechanism to blow things back into. You can use a compressor or spray air. But, and of course, when we service these machines in a workshop, we have all the covers off, everything is stripped down, so we do use a compressor and it works great for us, but you don't have that benefit in the home. So for you to maintain it, my recommendation is to use a paintbrush and a pair of tweezers. Now this is a fairly clean machine. Actually, there's hardly any fluff or lint in there. But if there were, it would be all in around the race of the hook race just here. It'd be between the feeders. There'd be fluff and lint everywhere. With your tweezers, go through and grab as much as you possibly can out using tweezers. That's your first step. Also use your tweezers to work in between the feed teeth. So the feed teeth are these guys here. Again, an embroidery only machine won't have these, only on a sewing machine or a sewing combo machine. Make sure there's no compressed lint built up between the feed teeth. The reason for that is if lint and fluff compresses here, as the feed teeth come up on the needle plate, they will eventually crack or bend the needle plate just there on these bars. So I've seen countless needle plates destroyed by a build-up of excess lint and fluff through there. So make sure you clean out all that nonsense and garbage in there. Once you've got everything you can with the tweezers, then just get your paintbrush, and these paintbrushes will actually grab lint. They'll actually, it's almost like it sticks to it. And just get in and clean out as much as you can. This is a very clean machine, so I don't have to be too worried about it. So you just use a nice long bristle brush, a good quality one so the bristles don't come off, and just brush away in there until it's as clean as you can possibly get it. Really, as far as that mechanism in there goes, that's all you need to do, and do that on a regular basis. If you're using your machine daily, I would actually every couple of days just quickly give it a brush out and clean it out. Because what happens with all that lint and fluff that builds up in your machine, and let's face it, you're working with cloth and fiber and stabilizers and thread, it will deposit lint and fluff, is if it's left unchecked, it will damage things, it will get dragged into the machine, it will get caught around gears and belts and so on and compress. It will also act to suck out or dry out all the oil and the lubricants that are in the machine, and it just means that you're potentially going to have problems, and it's the main reason for getting a machine service is you've got to get all that stuff out. So once you've done that and you've cleaned out that area, on this machine there's nowhere you need to oil, so you just need to get this back in. I'm going to put the embroidery bobbin case back in, but before I do, and this is very important, and particularly, I'm on a brother, so I'm going to reference to this one, you should always put your needle plate back on before you put your bobbin case back in. The reason for that is if I put my bobbin case back in and put it in the correct position, in the process of putting the needle plate on, if I inadvertently knock the bobbin case out of position and then tighten my needle plate, I could lock the bobbin case into the incorrect position, and the minute I start sewing and embroidering, I will jam up my machine. So I don't want to do that. So always make sure you put your needle plate back on first. It's just a matter of sliding it into position. Make sure we don't get our thread caught there. Again, you don't want to drop the screws in there, so if you just position that grey plate there, it doesn't need to be attached, it just needs to stop you from inadvertently dropping the screws down there. And just start the screws off, screw them in by hand until they're kind of taken. Now these are what we call countersunk screws, so they will automatically position the needle plate into the right position. Again, I'm trying to keep my hand out of the way here for you so you can see, but it's a wee bit hard. So I'm just using my finger to just give that a few turns. Now that I've got those screws in, I can take that grey plate away. And then we use that great little screwdriver. Now these are available on our website too. They're just a multi-purpose or multi-function screwdriver, I think they're called. About 20 bucks, so they're well worth it. And then you can just use that to, again, I'm sorry if I'm in the way, but it's just one of those awkward things you've got to do on camera sometimes. There we go. So we're just about done. Whoops. Do make sure you tighten those screws up correctly. I see so many people come in or over the years I have, and you know, they've done the good thing, they've done the maintenance that they needed to do, and then they're having problems, they're not stitching correctly. That's all good and tight, only to find out they didn't tighten the screws properly. So just make sure you do that. Now, put needle plates in place, positioning the bobbin case. Again, this is a brother, so a lot of brother owners out there. Got a little arrow on the bobbin case, and you've got a little white dot on the needle plate. They just need to line up. You always must make sure that the needle is in the correct up position when you're replacing your bobbin case. If you've turned your machine off and you've, for whatever reason, turned your hand wheel, then the needle will be in the wrong position, but more importantly, the hook mechanism will be in the wrong position to efficiently get the bobbin case back in. If it's switched off, easiest way to test that is on the hand wheel of the machine. There's a little tiny line that protrudes on the hand wheel. You'll feel it. There's only one line on the hand wheel. That needs to be at the very top. So as long as you can feel that at what we call 12 o'clock on the clock dial, that means your machine is in the correct position. If you had the machine on prior to starting this and your needle was stopped in the correct up position, it will be in the right position. You don't need to change anything. Putting the bobbin case back in is just a matter of making sure that it's set correctly. So when it's set correctly, there will be a little bit of lateral rocking on it. You'll feel it. It'll just sort of rock backwards or left and right, just slightly. You'll see that it's sitting nice and flush with everything, and the little arrow and the dot are lining up right here. So as long as that's in position, bobbin case is great. Then it's just a case of taking this little grey slide plate and sliding that back in, pushing it back, and that's our machine already, the whole bobbin area cleaned out, ready to go back into sewing mode, and all done. So one thing I do want to talk about just before I move on with anything else is also checking your bobbin case before you put it back in, actually, just to make sure that there's no foreign matter caught in the bobbin case tension spring. This is a really, really common thing where customers will often ring us and say, all of a sudden, for no reason, my bobbin is coming to the top of my fabric and it was working perfectly and now it isn't. So many times, it just simply means there's some foreign matter or a bit of thread or lint or fluff caught in the bobbin case tension. So let's have a closer look at that. So this is an embroidery bobbin case, and I'm just going to load the bobbin in there as it would be sitting in the machine. And that's how it sits in the machine. I can tell you now that doesn't feel the right tension. So the best way to check that, and this is very common, so if you all of a sudden have bobbin thread coming to the top of the fabric and you've done nothing, it's just happened out of the blue, just grab a fine pin. The finer the pin, the better. Take your bobbin case, and looking very closely here, you can see there's this solid steel plate here. It's curved, but that's quite a thick steel plate. And then there's a couple of spring mechanisms. And these are the tension springs on the machine. They're adjusted by this screw here. And I'm not worried about that at the moment. I've done a completely different video on how to set tensions on your bobbin. But I think this is a very important maintenance piece here, is making sure there's no foreign matter. So if I take the solid steel plate there, and then the closest flat spring to it, which is this one here, I hope it's clear enough on camera, and if I just gently prise my pin in there and dig around a bit, look at that. There is a bit of thread caught in there. And if I just got to get back in there, wow, look at that. Now, do you think your machine's going to work well with that sitting in there? There it is. I'll put it up against a black surface. So that was stuck in the tension assembly. Now, that can happen for all sorts of reasons. It might not even be that big. It could be the tiniest little bit of fluff. But if there is something caught between the spring and that steel plate there, it means that the tension is not closing correctly. So you could screw the screw, tighten it as hard as you like. It's not going to make any difference. It's just a bit of lint and fluff caught in there. We have had countless machines that have come in for service, for repair, where all we've had to do for the customer is pop the machine on the counter, grab a bit of lint or fluff out of the bobbin case, and the machine works beautifully. So, you know, when you think your machine might be broken, it might not be. It's probably just something like that, and you can fix that yourself. So that's how that works. Check that. Most bobbin cases are similar to this. You might have a bobbin case that pushes in from the front. It will have a similar setup. There'll be a tension spring on it. And if there's foreign matter caught in there, it's not going to be correct. Watch our other video on how to set bobbin tension, and that will explain that in a lot more detail. So that's bobbins. That's how you clean out your machine, and how you just check that your bobbin is good. You can also, by the way, just do a quick view of your bobbin case. Run your fingers around the perimeter. If there's sharp edges or scratches or burrs or needle holes anywhere, that could indicate that you've had a bit of a needle crash or damage the bobbin case. A damaged bobbin case will give you no end of grief. And bobbin cases are considered a consumable item, so they're not like a main part of or a warranty part of the machine. They are consumable, and they do wear out. They're designed to wear out. They will wear out. They're very hard working. It's always a good idea to have a spare bobbin case, because invariably, you know, if you have a needle break or something crazy goes wrong, it's usually at the worst possible time, and you may not be able to get a bobbin case quickly to keep you going. So a spare bobbin case is always handy. So that's that area there. It goes without saying, use a good quality needle, the correct needle for the job at hand, and there's loads of other information on that. I'm not going to dig too deep into that, but good quality needles are very important, of course, and as is the correct needle. Same as thread, make sure you're using good quality thread. For sewing, I recommend Resant as the premium thread on the market, and it's that's another story, and I've got a video explaining different threads, etc. as well. So let's also consider the way that your thread is getting to the machine. Again, a common cause of problem is thread that is getting caught or not threaded correctly. So whenever you're threading your machine, few things. Firstly, on most modern machines, it's impossible to do otherwise, but you must thread your machine with the needle or the presser foot in the up position. Let me just put my presser foot back on there, because that'll be easier to see then. I'll just drop that down. But when the presser foot is up, it means that the whole tension release mechanism is open, and that means when you thread your machine, the thread will go into the tension correctly. A little tip, when you're threading your machine, once you get through down to the last step before you thread the needle, it's a good idea just to hold the thread back at the spool and give the thread a bit of a pull that way. And that means that it just ensures that the thread is pulled into the tension assembly. If you start stitching without the thread in the tension assembly, there's no tension on the top thread. That means you'll get a big bird's nest of thread underneath the fabric. So if ever you see that, a real big nest of thread under the fabric, it's almost entirely 95% is going to be a result of having no tension on the top thread. It's not going to be a problem on the bobbin. So it kind of is a bit counterintuitive. It's what you would think it'd be opposite, but it's the top thread. So do that, make sure that the thread is in the tension, and that will solve a lot of problems. Whenever you're laying thread down in the top section of a machine, do make sure that you have the little spool cap on to keep it in place there. This is Resant. However, if I was using Hemingway thread with the little plastic caps, I would not use that little spool cap. So that's just a little tip. Watch a Hemingway thread video and you'll see how beneficial that thread is and how easy it is to use. So threading is very important. If you use the big high spools or the tall industrial spools, obviously you would need to have a separate spool holder beside the machine so as you can get correct thread delivery. And I think I'll do another video on thread delivery. I could talk all day about that. But just make sure you thread correctly, good needle, good thread, and that will resolve a lot of problems. Another issue I want to quickly talk about is your power supply. Most all modern machines are electronic or computerized in some sense. You know, this is a dream machine, lots of computer power in here, beautifully reliable, fantastic machines. But the one thing we can't control is your local power supply. And I can tell you firsthand now, we are seeing a lot of issues with the move for everyone to get solar on their roofs and inverters on their houses. We are seeing issues with inverters that are failing and not delivering the correct power, fluctuating power levels. So I plead with everyone to make sure that you are using some form of surge protection on your machine. Even the most basic surge protection like this little guy here, a single surge protector, plug that into your power socket and plug your machine into that. That at least affords some protection against power surges and spikes. And I just want to mention, importantly, how these work. So a surge protector is like a sponge. If you could imagine a big thick sponge and pouring a bucket of water onto it, the sponge will absorb all the water it can until it's completely full, and then it can absorb no more, and the water will just spill out and go everywhere. Surge protection is a bit the same, and instead of absorbing water, they absorb excess energy, and that's rated in what we call joules. So whenever you're looking for a surge protection device, the higher the joules rating, the more efficient or the better that unit's going to be. This is a simple little unit, and it has an 1100 joules rating. So once it absorbs all the joules or the excess energy it can, it won't be functioning very well at all. In fact, it'll be affording no protection at all. By contrast, if you go to a really top of the range type of surge protection device like this guy here, this one actually plugs directly into your machine, and this device here is the surge protection. And if we turn around, I think it's on the back here, this unit actually has, I know it says it here somewhere, 23,000 joules of energy or ability to absorb excess energy. That's massive. So that's about the most premium surge protector you could get. My theory is if you're spending, $5, $6, $10, $20,000 on a really high-end machine, a couple $100 on a surge protection device is money well spent, and that will be peace of mind for you. But nothing beats if you get a big storm come through and you can see a thunderstorm brewing around. There is no better thing than actually unplugging the machine completely from the wall and removing it from anywhere around that plug, because it happens quite frequently, and a lightning strike on or around your property could fry every piece of electronics you have in your home. And while surge protection is great, you can't beat unplugging the machine during an extreme event like that. And even just turning the machine off doesn't help, because a surge protect or a lightning strike can bypass all that, jump across the switch and actually fry a machine. I've even heard of situations where a plug has been taken out of the wall and left just beside the socket. A lightning strike has actually jumped through the line, actually found the socket. It's amazing how it works, and still fried the machine. So remove it completely and move it away in an extreme situation. So the other problem with power is there is a lot of fluctuation in power source supplies in various locations. In rural senses, sometimes the power is not very constant. You can get both spikes and brownouts, and that can cause all sorts of issues. So the more clean your energy or your power supply, the better your machine will perform, and the more protected the circuitry and the electronics will be. Another issue that is something you can easily avoid is most new sort of embroidery machines and sewing machine and embroidery machine combinations will have access or give you access by a USB port on the side of the machine to load designs. A little tip, and I think it's well worth doing, is to invest in a tiny little USB extension socket. Plug this into your machine, and then as you're constantly removing USB sticks and putting them back in, plug the USB stick into the end of this little extension. And what that means is you're not constantly plugging a USB stick in and out of the USB socket on the end of the machine. Now, the reason I say that is those little sockets wear out, and if you're not terribly careful, you can actually easily damage a USB socket, damage the contacts on it, etc. So it really doesn't matter if you damage a $5 lead, but you don't want to damage the USB socket on the end of the machine. So I reckon that's a fantastic tip, one well worth doing. When we're talking about the bigger machines with all the lovely electronics, it's a good idea to keep your screen nice and clean as well. Now on this one, this is a big screen, lovely touch screen, and I might just switch that off. It might show up a bit better without it on, but they get dirty and they get all the oils and things from your fingers. Keep them clean. A microfiber cleaner is always handy, so wipe it down with that. But these days, with all the nasty bugs around, we now have the Safe Clean screen cleaner. This is a non-alcoholic a non-alcohol screen cleaner, so there's no alcohol in it at all. And a quick spray of that, and using a microfiber cloth, just give that screen a really good clean down, and it will not only clean it, but it'll kill any bugs and bacteria that is left on the screen. And wow, that looks nice and beautiful and clean now. So, and you can use that on your computer screens, your TV, anything. It's completely safe for all types of screens. And if you're an Echidna customer, you probably have a few of our microfiber screen cleaners lying around. Okay, so I think, look, that's covered a whole heap of different things. And just looking back through my notes here, again, this is all available on our website. We've covered all that. I could do, and I will do, other videos on simple things like why thread breaks and why needles do whatever they do. So keep your eyes open for all those extra videos. But as far as maintaining your machine in good order, what we've gone through today is really important, and it will give you some great longevity and better sewing and better performance on your machine for years to come. So any questions at all, as usual, get hold of us by phone, email, on our live chat and all that sort of thing. We're here to help you. Got loads of knowledgeable people here to give you all the advice that you might need. And so I guess all that's left to say is happy sewing and embroidery. Cheers.